Hello, lovelies. I'm so excited to share just a little bit about how to let go of the blocks that stop us from being able to love ourselves deeper and give ourselves that deep, deep, deep sense of awe and inspiration and adoration that we tend to give everything else except for ourselves sometimes. And if you've already been on the journey of self-love for a while, you are probably familiar with a lot of what I'm sharing, but perhaps something is new for you, or it will spark a thought process that will dive into spirit teaching you what deeper level is required for you in order to open up and love that beautiful, messy, delicious human that you are. So one of the things that comes up a lot as we start to dive in to love ourselves is trying to understand how we can love something that's imperfect. I'm a dense, messy human, and we are these massive spiritual beings. And if you've already done the meditation with Rick, where you dive into your higher self, you are aware of how expansive you are. I don't even have a good word for it. How massively unlimited your potential is, and who you are, and how uniquely delicious you are. Well, sometimes when we get stuck in this massive of how beautiful and expansive everything is, we can sometimes feel this big when we come back to this dense human body. It's true. I probably go through this at least a few times a month where it's like, wow, the universe is so big, and look at all this healing, and look how epic this soul is, and this soul is, and this soul is. And when I work one-on-one with clients, it's like I unzip their soul, their little body flesh bag, and the sides open, and I see all of the shadow and all the darkness and all the crap that they're not. And I see all of this light being, all of this potential, all of this pure love. So it's powerful. And I'm like, wow, look at the combination that you are. You are a flavor all by yourself, and I love you so much. And then sometimes I'll go back and be like, oh, what's up, flavor I always have, Holly? And so sometimes it can cause this comparison. It can cause this sense of not feeling like we're fully who we want to be. And so that's kind of what we want to address in this video. And so I honestly have to say that when I talk myself out of my head of feeling like I'm insignificant, I'm just like a piece of dust in this massive, expansive universe and all the possible scenarios that exist, sometimes it is, you feel like you're tiny. So the thing I tell myself, number one, is that my higher self, my creator, my God, whoever chose to combine Hollie Hope and all of the creation of what made this combination of Hollie Hope, somebody knew what they were doing. Somebody said, you know what? I'm cooking up something delicious. What would it be like if I added some of this and some of that and some of this and some of that and some of this and some of that? If you like ice cream, that's the vision that Spirit a lot of times will give me. I love ice cream. Well, I did when I ate a lot of it. I don't do dairy as much now, but I love ice cream, and I love all of the flavors. So sometimes I feel like Rocky Road, and sometimes I feel like strawberry. Rocky Road and strawberry are not the same. Or if you look even deeper, like mint chocolate chip and strawberry are so different, and you don't even want to put those two together. Like, nah, that doesn't taste good. And so some palates like different things, and some flavors blend together super well, and you can just throw them all in and have this beautiful foodgasm of delicious experience. And some of them, the simplicity is what makes them beautiful, or the extra crazy stuff that goes in there. Like, props to Ben and Jerry's for making crazy names and crazy combinations. So I love just reading the names are fun for me. And so I think about it and I'm like, wow, you know what? In all the history of the world, in all the history of all the worlds, in all the humans that exist, there's not a single human that is like this one right here. So there's not a single human that's like you right there. Not a single one. There's people who may look similar. There's people who may have similar skill sets here and there, but then this one is totally different. That's why we love looking at our astrology charts and seeing the different combinations. That's why it's so wonderful the more people and community we share. If we were all meant to be the same, we'd be these gray blobs, right? And so I love the deliciousness of being different. And sometimes that's hard because society has told us for a long time that in order to be safe, we have to be alike, which makes sense because way back in our primal days, when, there's tigers and lions and bears outside of the tribe, if your tribe rejects you and you are ostracized or banished, you're all by yourself. How are you going to take down a lion all by yourself? Now, if there's 10 of you, you can probably strategically take out a lion. And so, or if you have fire, or if you have a barricade and you have people to help you build this barricade, because if you spend all your time building a barricade and not getting food, then you starve to death in your barricade. And so we come from this primal place of wanting to be loved and accepted by having others around us. And conformity was required in order for survival. At least that's what we were taught at the time. But that's still in our DNA. However, it's no longer true. Conformity stops us from understanding ourselves. It keeps us comparing ourselves to other people, and you always compare your worst to someone else's best. Rarely do you compare your best to somebody else's worst, but if you do, you probably aren't watching this video because you will have assumed you love yourself more than anybody else could love anybody. So, and sometimes it's okay for our ego to come in and say, hey, what I do is really, really great. What I have to offer is really fantastic. That's not a bad ego. Sometimes we have this belief that humility means we always second guess ourselves. We always keep ourselves less than everybody else. We keep ourselves small. We keep ourselves from growing and progressing too much because we'd rather wait until somebody told us that what we have is valuable and valid. That's not humility, honey. That's not. That's tearing ourselves down to keep ourselves from shining too bright and safe. Remember, you have your beautiful earrings with the feathers. Oh, this is another set that I love. You have your beautiful earrings to stand out, to peacock a little bit, to say, hey, look, I'm bright and I'm different and I'm wonky and it's fine. Or imperfect and it's fine, but nobody's going to say that. And if you are, you again probably wouldn't have gotten this kit. And so the ego is too much when we say, hey, what I have is better than anybody else on the planet and nobody else will be as great as me. Now that is an ego going too far. So we don't want to go to the low spectrum where we're overly humble and we're less than dirt. And I mean, I love dirt, obviously. We're less than dirt and we don't get to stand in our strength because we don't want to be considered egocentric or conceited, versus so far that our ego is what drives us. And even if somebody told us that we were being full of ourselves, we wouldn't even hear them. We'd be like, oh, that's just not true. It's your problem, blah, 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 right? So if you worry about being too egocentric, being too conceited, odds are you're not. It's not in your character. Because people who are egocentric and full of themselves don't take time to wonder if they're full of themselves. They don't care. They think they're better than everything. So we want the happy middle ground where it's like, okay, I have some things that are great. I have some things that are not so great, but those not so great things are going to be great one day. And that's the next area where a lot of people struggle. Well, how can I love this person when I have all these flaws, when I have all these things I don't like? So I encourage you to take a moment. You can pause the video after I say this so that I don't give away the exercise. But take a moment, get out a paper and pen, and literally set a timer. And in 30 seconds, write down all your flaws. All of them. Physical, emotional, whatever it is, spiritual. Where do you feel like you are imperfect or lacking? And the things that you tell yourself, if I just fix this, if I just fix this, you know what? If I just lose a little bit of weight, I will be more physically attractive and my dating life will be better. Or if I just do this thing where, and like, I can't even think of it now. If I just didn't procrastinate so much, then I would get more done, then I would be happier and I would make more money. If I just get up 2 hours earlier, only 2 hours, then I can get everything I need to done in a day and I can have the rest of the day to relax and give everybody else what they need. If I just, then I'll get this, then I'll get that. Allowing yourself to go through all of these ugly negative thoughts. Sometimes we don't like putting them on paper because we don't want to admit that we actually think them. But if you put them on paper, you can find that you're getting them out and you're at least calling to action what your dense human brain has been telling you all along. And if you pretend to not acknowledge that those thoughts are going through, then it actually creates a disconnect because you're not acknowledging it, and it keeps happening. The more you ignore it, the more it'll grow in the back of your mind, and you can't actually look at it and go, wait, that's not true. So take 30 seconds and write all the flaws, even if it's just one. Go ahead and pause. Pause, 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 pause. Okay, so if you paused it, you have your things written down. If you didn't, you're just watching this. You're welcome for the entertainment. And either you're telling yourself you don't have any flaws, or every time you say you have a flaw, you correct it immediately because you've been trying to correct your thinking for a while. Or you have something different that happened, and I would love to know what, because I don't profess to know everything about everybody and everybody's experience. So with your flaws, it's interesting because every flaw that we hold is a potential for growth. One of the things I love about the Bible is it states that God gave us weaknesses that we can turn them into strengths, right? So God gave us flaws that we can turn them into areas where we thrive, our superpowers. So a lot of the flaws that I used to write down, I'd write them down as fix-it lists, but they were really break-it lists because I was breaking myself into pieces and then rebuilding those pieces, hoping it would become somebody different, somebody more loved, somebody better. And not realizing that, well, we already love ourselves, because if we didn't love ourselves, we wouldn't have that whole self-preservation thing, right? So we love ourselves. It's not a matter of if you love yourself. It's a matter of if you fully accept yourself in all that you are, that messy human, raw as she is, and choosing to love her in that wholeness, in the messiness, in all that she is. Just like you would love a 2-year-old who throws tantrums and is sticky and snotty half the time and requires a lot of energy and a lot of work, but they're also so flippin' cute, and they say the funnest things, and there's so much self-fulfillment and satisfaction in having this cute wonky 2-year-old around, right? So you're the same way with your wholeness and all that you are. And so with your list of flaws, we're going to take a moment and get to turn them into superpowers. And you might have already done this. So if you find that there's something that used to be a flaw that you've already turned into a superpower strength, then feel free to write down that you've done that, because that's huge and that deserves to be celebrated. So for me, one of my flaws that I mentioned was my shyness, right? So my flaw was that I don't like talking to people, and I'm really afraid of what everybody else is thinking. So that was a flaw. That was something that kept me from shining as me, kept me from risking things. It kept me from verbalizing thoughts and ideas that I had. It kept me from even allowing myself to think of thoughts and ideas. I would just panic and think about what everybody else was thinking, and I would get in all their heads. Well, I didn't realize at the time that I was an empath, and I was actually getting everything they were thinking, and I knew exactly what they were thinking about me, and that information was correct that I was thinking they were thinking. So I could think people were thinking things they were actually thinking, and I would let that impact what I would think of me, right? Are you confused yet? So allowing yourself to see, okay, this flaw of knowing what people are thinking and holding myself back because I get overwhelmed when I'm around people and I can sense that they aren't beaming love at me, and getting confused and worried and stressed, all of that allowed me the ability to assess instantly if I was safe or not. It allowed me, as I learned to use the gift, how to help people clear their emotional crap. It also helped me to empathize with people who do have chronic panic attacks and who don't feel safe. So I knew how to hold safe space for people when they don't know where they are, they don't know what they're doing, they don't know their environment, they walk in and they feel awkward, and I can see that they feel awkward, and I can go, oh my gosh, you probably feel awkward, me too. That's a superpower, is making people feel comfortable. So the flaw of always being uncomfortable is actually that I get to make people feel very, very comfortable, if that makes sense. Other flaws that I've seen in the past that have ended up being super, super, super healing. There was one woman in a workshop I did, and I taught this similar concept, and she had a massive injury when she was young, and she had a scar that went right across her face. And all through high school, you know, kids are mean, and they called her Frankenstein, and she could never look in a mirror and feel that she was beautiful. Since that time, we worked on this flaw, and, you know, I channeled through, okay, here's your flaw. how is it a strength? You know, and everybody's like raising their hands if they get stuck and they don't know how to turn their flaw to a strength. And for her, the answer that came through for her was the amount of comfort she offers people. Nobody could ever say, you don't understand pain. You don't understand what it's like to not feel beautiful. You don't understand what it's like to be rejected, to be hurt, to be bullied. She could instantly walk in and people would not feel threatened by her beauty or by her essence, because they could see that she'd already been through some tough stuff. Like, regardless of who you are, somebody has a scar on their face, you're like, wow, something happened to you. And they instantly feel compassion for her and they instantly feel safe. So one of her superpowers is she is probably the most safe human you could ever be around. You could tell her anything. You can be as messy and ugly, cry all over the place, and she would not judge you. And so, because she not only does she have this huge scar on her face, so primarily it's like, oh good, she's not a threat, you know, because some of us, we do that. But she also, you knew she had been through something really, really difficult. So she'd probably understand you going through something really, really difficult, even though it's different. So every single one of our flaws is just like a pendulum. We just have to swing it to the other side so we find where it's our superpower. Another one I had was I struggled with depression and anxiety all while I grew up. Abusive homes will do that, you know, and you don't know if you're going to get beaten that day. You'll have a lot of anxiety, and then after something you'll have a lot of depression for all the things you did wrong that you couldn't do to avoid it happening. Like, it's a normal thing. And as I look in my family history of the women, as I've gotten older and I've studied more about it, I'm like, oh, depression runs in our DNA. But then again, like, we are the children of the Great Depression, so it kind of makes sense. So it's interesting though, because Hope is actually my middle name, if you didn't already know that. And so I go by it because I feel like that honors me more than a former married last name. And so being named Hollie Hope, it's kind of interesting because from the earliest stages I could remember, feeling hopeless was actually a really everyday challenge for me. I remember being a little girl and walking home from school and feeling complete despair and hopelessness. I would walk through these woods and I would feel like nobody was there for me and nobody wanted me, nobody made sure I was safe. And then I'd just dance in the woods and pretend I was a tiger. Shock, right? And this was Maryland, so the woods were really big and dense. I'm like, oh, I'm glad I didn't like disappear. I must have had lots of angels. And so hopelessness was my biggest flaw, is I would go hopeless, like, oh, this didn't work, hopeless. Oh, this didn't work, hopeless. Even when I was 14 and I was raped by my boyfriend, the first emotion I felt was, oh, it's hopeless, because he's like, hey, nobody else is gonna want you. I took your best value. And I was like, oh, you're right, this is hopeless. And so that was like my default emotion. And which is funny because it's literally my middle name. And now I've turned that into a superpower because I felt so much hopeless so often that if somebody gives me a pile of hopelessness, I can be like, oh, well, here's your hope, here's your hope, here's your hope, here's your hope, here's your hope. And I can pick it out. Why? Because I've already experienced all those things. So allow yourself to look at some of these flaws and see, how is it actually a strength? How does it help you relate to people better? How does it help you to connect with people better? How does it help you to not be so full of yourself so that you can be quiet and soft with other people and not expect them to be perfect all the time? So allow yourself to now pause this if you need to and make a list of every negative thing you wrote down, draw a little arrow, ding, ding, and write on the other side the positive. How is it a superpower? So go ahead and do that now. You can pause and then I'll wait digitally. Okay, go ahead, pause it, flip your positives. Or if you're doing this in your head, do it in your head. And welcome back. Now that we have a new positive perspective, hopefully, we are going to talk about the next thing that we tend to use to block ourselves from being able to love ourselves deeper and accept that whole human. And that is perspectives that we assume other people have about ourselves. So what are the things that you think people are thinking about you? A lot of times we'll think people are thinking things, and we will end up proactively doing things, thinking things, explaining ourselves, being defensive so that they don't think those things, or over-explaining. Sometimes they show up as telling the world, hey, by the way, I see this flaw, I see this thing, I will point it out. I will either do self-deprecation humor to point it out and make it easier, because I don't want you to tell me what's wrong with me. So I know, and I hate bringing up weight, because I feel like the body is beautiful and fluid in every single shape and form. But this is one of the areas that we beat ourselves up the most about, are like the fat jokes. Like even the comedian Fluffy. And he says, I'm 300 pounds. Of course I want some cake. And I'm like, or 500 pounds. I don't know how much he weighs. I don't know numbers. They don't exist to me. And he makes all these jokes that are self-deprecating, and they're so funny because all of us feel that way about ourselves a little bit, right? And we get used to this because society says if you don't conform, make fun of it so others can't make fun of you. So what are those things that you think other people think about you? So one of mine is, people think I'm really woo-woo and really weird and probably crazy. People probably also think like that I'm probably chaotic and all over the place. I'm just thinking of ones either current or past. People think, oh, this is a big one for me. So growing up, my house always had to be super, super clean. My dad was in the military, so if it wasn't super clean, we got in big trouble. And my mother wasn't very good at keeping it clean. They divorced. My dad's house is always pristine. My mom's house is always a wreck. So I have this belief that people think I'm a slob if my house is messy and I'm disorganized and I don't have my shit together. And so that's a thing. So what I do, and what I noticed when I was little, was when somebody would come to the house and the house is messy, my mom would say, oh, excuse the mess. I've had this going on and this going on. And I remember even as a child going, excuse the mess. There is no excuse. It's messy all the time. Just say I'm messy and own it. Like, I remember being so mad as a child, like, this doesn't make sense. Why would I do that? And then as an adult, I grew up and I was like, oh my gosh, people are going to think I'm a slob because my house is messy. So I need to explain why before they even notice or ask. And so I would say, excuse the mess. I was doing this and this and this. And then I started noticing other people doing that. And so I'd go into a house and I'm like, oh, excuse the mess. I've got this laundry and da-da-da, and excuse this. I've got this. Da-da-da. And then I started to notice. I didn't even notice their mess until they said, excuse the mess. And then instantly my eyes went, oh, you're right. It is messy in here. Thanks for drawing attention. I was thinking, hey, I was happy to see you. Or, oh, you have a dog. Or I don't know, a lot of other things. The last thing I was thinking was, wow, your house is messy. That's not what I was thinking at all. And so understanding that a lot of the things we think other people are thinking about us, they're not actually thinking about us. They're actually thinking probably something completely different. And here's the thing is, maybe sometimes people do think them, and maybe sometimes people say these things. But then what we tend to do is we tend to take those on as everybody thinks about them all the time. And it's just not true. And so allow yourself to take a moment and reflect. What are the things that I've been allowing myself to believe people are thinking about me that are causing me to change the way I show up in the world? Doesn't matter if they're true or not. It matters if they change the way you show up in the world. Because what happens is you show up a different way than what is authentic to you. So now you're a big fat liar. And you're not you. And you're suppressing you, which leads to depression, which also leads to you losing your sense of who you are. Because now you become what everybody else is. And you hate it. And then one day you decide to do something different and you're the wild, crazy person and you're having to explain yourself. So take a moment and ask yourself, what are these things? What are the things that I'm defending myself for? What are the things that I'm explaining myself for? What are the things that I don't need to spend time thinking about that I constantly feel like I'm spending time thinking about, and tuning into those? So I hope that this has helped to clear out some of the negative perspectives that you might hold about the beautiful, delicious human that you are. If you feel so called, maybe make a list of all the delicious flavors that exist within you. What is it that makes your heart sing about you? Pretend you are somebody else looking on you. Like, what are the things that sometimes you do that make you giggle? My favorite is when I'll like laugh at myself as I'm doing something and I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this, but oh, it's so much fun. Like the other day there was a frog in my yard, big old toad. And I'm like, I have to touch the toad. I have to touch the toad. And as I'm doing this, my logical brain is like, you don't need to touch the toad. You don't know what it's on it. You don't know where it's been. You don't know if you're going to get some weird disease. Why would you touch a toad? And I'm like, because it would be fun. And I was like, oh, Holly, you love having fun in this way. Okay, let's touch the toad. And I did. And so allowing that playfulness, allowing that inner child to come out. What are your inner child pieces that are so unique to you? And if you have to travel to when you were younger, that's fine, because that girl's still in there. As we progress, we don't magically become something different. All we do is we open this gate within us, and it's like this light shines out, and it keeps shining bigger and bigger. And as it shines, it almost looks like wings. Everything that we're not on the darkness just gets pushed out. Like, oh, not that, not that. All of these pieces that we said we were. Nope, I'm not any of this. I'm not any of this. And so I encourage you to allow yourself to see, well, what am I expanding on? What am I becoming more of? Because that's really what happens as we get older, is we expand what we are and we push off everything that we're not. And less and less and less do those heavy things actually matter or resonate with us. The only sad thing is I wish more people did it, because not everybody does, which means not everybody approves of you expanding all that you are and not magically changing into something else. But that's also what love is loving what is. So now that you have dived into some of that, finish your thought process. I encourage you to do some journaling. And the next step I would encourage you to do is your beautiful self-love ceremony, which I'll see you in next.